Hi, welcome to the Museum of Chincoteague. Today we're celebrating 50 years since the beginning of our groundbreaking and the evolution of our museum. Now back 50 years ago, it all started with a group of local women on the island who wanted to preserve the history of the island and what makes our island a special place. Now most of these women didn't have any museum study expertise. They were just a group of women that wanted to preserve the history of our island and especially the seafood industry. Now most of these women, it was their husbands, their fathers, their sons who worked in the seafood business, mostly oysters. So the museum evolved into a museum called the Oyster Museum. It was one of a kind, the only one in the world. This museum has evolved over the years into something special that evolves all around the island itself, the history of the island from prehistoric to present day. The museum is now called the Museum of Chincoteague. There's lots of wonderful exhibits here, and what we'd like to do is take you around and show you some of the special exhibits, give you a taste of what the museum is all about, and hopefully on your next visit you'll come on and stop by the museum and see what's in store. So let's show you around. When you enter into the museum, the very first thing you're going to see is this. This is a first order Fresnel lens. This is really an incredibly special piece that we have here in the museum. It's a first order lens, and that simply means that it's the most powerful. And it's called Fresnel because it's named for the man who invented it, Augustus Fresnel. He's from France, and the whole idea of this type of lens was an innovation in the mid-1850s. And the lens served in our Chincoteague lighthouse for nearly 100 years. So in the 1860s, it was brought over from France and served in our lighthouse. By the 1960s, it was removed, and they decided to put in an automated light, which if you get the chance to go in the lighthouse, you can see that automated light still in there today. This lens was removed from the lighthouse and simply placed out on the hill by the lighthouse for many, many years. It was exposed to the elements. Eventually they put it in a giant box, but still it was exposed to weather and initially had been exposed to birds and other people throwing rocks at it. I mean, we are so fortunate to have it here in the museum. But in the mid-1990s, the staff here at the museum decided if they didn't save this lens, who would? They set the wheels in motion to be able to get the lens off of the hill on the at the lighthouse and bring it over here to our museum. They spent a few years cleaning it, and now it is a prominent piece here in our museum. It is one of 18 left in the United States of this size, so it really is incredibly rare, and considering all that could have happened to it when it was outside, we're very fortunate to have it here in a prominent place in our local museum. Probably the most popular exhibit in the museum is when folks come around the corner and get to see Misty and Stormy here on display at the museum. The whole backstory on Misty, well, Marguerite Henry came to Chincoteague in 1946, eager to write a story about the island, its people, and this event she had heard about called pony penning. Having never been here, she decided to go straight to the horse's mouth, and she went to the Beebe Ranch. She was introduced to Grandma and Grandpa Beebe, met their grandchildren, Paul and Maureen, and their brand new little filly who was on the farm named Misty. Well, Marguerite Henry fell in love with Misty and the family and pony penning and Chincoteague and wrote a wonderful book. So in 1947, Misty of Chincoteague came out, followed by several other books that Marguerite wrote about the island, and the rest is history. The book was a wonderful success for her personally and a huge success for our island. Folks were coming here from all over the world to meet the family, to meet Misty, and to come here and learn about the island and its people. The exhibit here has wonderful things from the Beebe Ranch, handmade signs that Grandpa Beebe made himself, along with Misty and Stormy. It is a must-see in the museum for sure. So this is one of my favorite exhibits. This is all about the seafood industry. Now, oysters being as important as they are, these oyster cans were used for utilitarian reasons. You filled them with oysters and shipped them all over the country. But as you can see behind me, they are beautiful forms of art now and highly collectible. Now, if we went back in time between the 1850s and the 1940s, Anywhere between 90 to 95% of the head of households on Chincoteague listed themselves in census records as either watermen or oystermen. That's everybody. Oysters were an incredibly important business here on the island. I've picked up this can to show you because Montauk oysters, Long Island oysters, were just as popular as Chincoteague oysters for a while there, but their numbers were depleting. Their demand was just as high, and I will say they were as popular as our oysters for the same reason. They're right next to the Atlantic Ocean and they're really salty. So what's a person to do when you're running out of your own oysters? Well, Montauk brought their cans down to Chincoteague and filled them here. So maybe your grandparents who were loving Montauk oysters were actually eating Chincoteague oysters. We'll never know, will we? Another special exhibit here at the museum is this wonderful stained glass window. This was one of many that was located in a home on the corner of Main and Church Street here on Chincoteague. It was the home of D.J. Wilton, who is considered our island's first millionaire, made his fortune, of course, in the oyster industry. This home was a magnificent, beautiful mansion by anybody's standards, and it was full of stained glass windows. He had every window specifically designed to incorporate something that reminded him of Chincoteague. In this particular window, we have a cardinal and also two porpoises spouting water, but some of the windows had seahorses and turtles. One even had the Chincoteague lighthouse. When the home was torn down in the 1950s, it wasn't just thrown away. The island folk are very frugal. They decided the best thing to do is to repurpose this house. 3 other homes were created out of this one house, and all the stained glass windows were preserved. They have been distributed within the family, and we are lucky enough that this one was given to the museum to put on display. Well, you don't have to be on Chincoteague very long to realize that this island loves their fire department. But in the beginning of the 20th century, we didn't even have a fire department. We did have a fire though in 1920. A fundraiser was started to raise funds to buy some sort of fire equipment. We decided the best idea was to create a quilt. We would actually use trousers from the men at the banks and use that fabric to make the quilt. And we would charge people, tourists and locals, a quarter to get their name embroidered on the quilt. With all that money, we were able to buy an 1880 pumper, which is beautiful. It's here on display in the museum. But as you can imagine, if your downtown's on fire, it's not going to put that fire out. So after a second devastating fire in 1924, it was decided we needed something bigger and better to raise funds to have a real fire department. This is where the idea from pony penning began. Now, we had wild ponies over on Chincoteague at that time. Many weren't owned by anybody. So the idea was that the fire department would claim ownership of those ponies, have an annual event, and with the funds that they could raise from the auction, they might be able to buy some actual 20th century fire equipment. The rest is history. So here we are back at the front of the museum. And the exhibit you see behind me is celebrating those 50 years that the museum has been here and the evolution of it. Actually, the artifacts that are behind me are from the original exhibits when the doors opened for the very first time. You've got an oyster blower over there, something that would have been in a shucking house, a beautiful model of a shucking house, and all the other artifacts behind me. You can imagine, where did these things come from? The women that started this museum searched around Virginia, got lots of help and advice from other museums around the state of Virginia, around the country. Even the Smithsonian helped with the initial artifacts. They also didn't have the funds to create the exhibits that they wanted, so they did what they did best. They had cake sales and card parties and fashion shows, anything they could do to raise the funds to make this museum happen. It is a wonderful exhibit here today, and it has evolved over the years based on their go-to attitude and not giving up because they didn't think they had the talent to do it. So we love our little museum. We love the support that the community has given. We've been here 50 years. I hope we'll be here 50 more. Next time you're in town, come visit the museum and see what exhibits are on display at that time. Have a wonderful day.